Welcome to the Module 2 e-scouting component. We're going to focus on only a few platforms here. One being CalTopo, which is a pretty ubiquitous, easy to map platform that can also be coupled with a handheld device like a phone, as well as transferring maps over to a GPS unit or an inReach type device. We'll also be talking about OnX maps, and we'll also be looking at Google Earth for some more detailed imagery, especially satellite imagery. So let's start off with CalTopo. Here we have an overview of Utah. For this exercise, we will be doing a San Rafael swell loop. Not the one we did for Flow Genomes Canyons. This is a 3-day loop, so similar time frame to our wildland field component. You can see here just right off the bat on CalTopo, I'm not sure who might be already familiar with this. There's a few tools that are handy when it comes to e-scouting. Right away, I'll just point out, if you see my cursor moving around, this position is noted in the top right corner in longitude, latitude, UTMs, as well as my elevation. So wherever that cursor is, that's a pretty handy, just quick reference. If you look to the right here, we have a drop-down menu with several different base maps. So we're going to go Map Builder Hybrid. And if we stack a base layer, pull that drop-down menu, we can even do some satellite imagery, so global imagery right here. Nothing really changed. However, if I go to my transparency, so this range right here on the top right, you can see my cursor moving. I can increase my transparency and it goes to a satellite image. And right about that halfway point, I have a pretty good overlay with the shaded relief, which also includes topo lines or contour lines, as well as my satellite imagery. And you'll see why that is handy. Okay, let's zoom in. We're going to zoom into the San Rafael swell. When I do a large kind of macro overview, I like to use the shaded relief or that topographic overlay base map because it typically shows roads and things a little easier. And that's how I zoom into an area. I can identify an area through the mountain ranges for sure, but roadways, how I'm going to access those places. We're going to zoom in to the bridge crossing the San Rafael River coming south out of Buckhorn Wash. And we're going to utilize this trailhead here because the area we want to backpack is generally going to be around this zone right here. Right away, I want to figure out what my mileage is based on my participants, what their goals are, what their objectives are, the demographic breakdown, how much experience they have, what do they want to learn, that sort of thing. So if we're just doing backcountry travel and some backcountry skills, I want to choose a loop that is challenging, yes, but challenging in a way that it's logistically or navigationally challenging. Maybe not necessarily a whole lot of mileage, which eats up a lot of time and is hard to get to course content. We want some navigational challenges, that sort of thing. I've determined that we want to do a little bit of off-trail and on-trail hiking. And you can see here along the San Rafael River, there is an established trail, although this map has it petering out here. As an example with using another platform, I'm going to go over to OnX maps, and this is what that platform looks like. Ignore all those pins. Those are ones I've dropped over the years. I don't think I'm giving away any secrets. If you look at the same area here, and of course I have the trailhead marked with a parking icon, OnX has this whole trail going all the way up canyon and continuing much farther than CalTopo has it. Figuring out what platform you're using, and they might have more or less detail depending on that platform. If I look at my trailhead, for example, you have a lot of roadways, parking, whatever it is right here to go ahead and look at my satellite imagery. Is that an actual trailhead? You can see here there's some vehicles, a corral, maybe another vehicle there. So I'm determining that, yeah, that's actually a legit trailhead. Because I want a little bit better clarity with my satellite imagery, I'm going to go back to OnX and just show you all how that differs. So this is OnX Maps, and I'm going to zoom in on that trailhead. Quite a bit crisper of an image, and you'll see why that's helpful down the road when we start identifying other landmarks. We're going to use this map to draw up our backpacking loop. Again, I'm going to decrease the transparency from that satellite image. And what I want to do is figure out what our mileage is each day and what our route might be. Just for kicks, I'm thinking that we start off the first day getting off the main trail and opening up a few other navigational challenges and interesting features. And I'm thinking we might want to do a loop up this drainage, up this little canyon. It looks like I can connect up potentially with some existing trails. We'll see if those are actual trails or not. I have an escape out here, and that takes us into Cane Wash, which will eventually lead us to the Santa Fe River and then out. In a perfect world, for a 3-day trip in terms of mileage, I might be wanting to look at roughly 15 miles, let's say, especially with navigational challenges, some off-trail travel, and a lot of curriculum. So stopping, going over some logistics, going over some backcountry travel, busting out the map and compass and really getting deep in some navigation. That's going to eat up some time, and I want to be able to build in that time. But I also want to have some pretty aesthetic, fun hiking that will illustrate some of the curriculum that I want to cover. So from this trailhead, I'm looking at potentially going up this wash here. And I want to consider where water is, of course, with this route. This looks like it could be pretty dry. I do have an up and over that is most certainly dry. And then in this wash here, Cane Wash, I want to make sure that we can hit water pretty quickly. And it's uncertain, at least looking at this map here with the dotted lines and that drainage, if there is reliable water. So again, we want to look at our satellite imagery. And before we do any mileage or anything like that, let's just determine whether these are some good places to camp. So I'm going to look at the head of this drainage. It looks pretty dry on that first day. So I might just maybe consider doing a dry camp up at the head of this wash. So let's pull out one of our other tools. I'm going to go to the trailhead and calculate how many miles it is into the head of this small canyon here. So right away, I'm going to start marking up my map. And I'm going to mark the trailhead, and I'm also going to mark and measure my first day of travel south up this drainage. Starting off, I'll right click and I'll pull up this menu. Hit that marker icon, and I'll leave that marker as red. We have our coordinates here. We can add several different icons should we choose. Maybe I'll hit that vehicle and label that trailhead. So from here, if I right click again, I'll get that line function. And you can see here, draws me a vector. What I'm going to do here, I'll keep the line weight. Maybe I'll change the color to blue so it's a little bit different than our trailhead marker and different than these marked trails here. It's going to be a solid line. I'm going to mark day 1 question mark, and our style of line, let's do a checked line just so we know that that's our walking trail. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and click. I'm more or less going to follow this drainage, maybe cutting off a couple of those oxbows, but I want to stay more or less true with the drainage so that I get a close approximation to the amount of miles. And we'll stop about there. This might be a good spot. You can see at the top of the screen we have 2.86 miles clocked, or 4.6 kilometers. So if I double click there, that saves that line for our day 1. If you can see that labeled at the top, if I just scroll over it. Using the satellite imagery, I want to determine whether there's water, whether we have a viable escape out of that canyon for day 2, if we do decide to camp here, and whether we have decent camping options. So this area, looking at our satellite imagery, looks like it could be a pretty darn good camping area. Again, we're at 2.87 miles, so that could be a pretty decent day to get into the trailhead, get gear sorted out, final pack up, and then getting on the trail. And it would also afford us time to scout a possible escape should we determine that we can get out of this canyon from our e-scouting, and then heading down there and getting boots on the ground and spending some daylight hours on day 1 after setting up camp to explore a possible escape. A few things I want to look at before we commit to this canyon will be if this trail links up, and possibly if it links up out of these slopes, these lower angle slopes, to the top of this mesa right here. So let's figure that out on Google Earth, because I want to demonstrate how useful this combination is with Google Earth, CalTopo, and OnX. So I want to get my exact position so I don't have to go searching on Google Earth. I can just plug in my coordinates. So again, right click. If I go to my position and elevation option, I want to go down to degrees, decimal, minutes. My longitude, latitude, that's just easier, the decimal form, to plug into Google Earth. Hit that, copy it. We're going to go to Google Earth. And right up here on the top left, just paste those coordinates in, search, and it's going to fly us and create a pin in that location. Nice. My son, by the way, loves this, going on Google Earth and flying in close, and then even flying backwards. So that's going to be our approximate camp position. Again, we don't really want to camp in the wash itself, but maybe up on these benches. Now, I can zoom in and get this oblique view of where camp is and this rim, which looks broken up enough that we might be able to get up and out pretty easily. If I go to the top right where you see north pointing at the top of that circle, I can change my view. And as I do that, I'm seeing a trail, if you follow my cursor, heading up through these boulders. I'm not sure exactly where it exits, potentially right here, but it certainly looks like a trail coming down. That's good to know. And again, full transparency, I've hiked that trail and it goes to the top of the rim. But if we're sight unseen and in a purely e-scouting way, we should cover all our bases. So I'm going to zoom in. Looks pretty rocky. We're looking for that escape out of the top of the canyon. It's unclear what this is. That might be a little pool or something like that in the shadows. Maybe what I'll do is zoom into there. Yeah, just a little rocky and a possible escape out. I'm going to go back to my original orientation around camp. So we've determined that there are some potential escapes, one here and one up canyon a ways, which might connect to that trail that's marked. But I'm not seeing very many trails up on the mesa, mostly these washes. But again, it's hard to determine. And full transparency again, having been there, there is an old mining road that traverses that mesa. And if we go to on X real quick, that's confirmed because there's actually a trail marked here. And there's actually a trail marked going clear up to the head of what they're calling Moore's Canyon and up to the mesa. So you can see that combining a lot of these platforms is starting to be really helpful in narrowing down what my route might actually look like. So we have a possible escape out here if we want to do that, or we head up canyon. So back to CalTopo and our route planning. We have our possible camp right here, or should I say right on these benches here. So again, right click, I want to mark that. I don't want a car there. Maybe I'll just do a standard point. And then let's mark our escapes. So again, let's talk about our first day, at least wrap up what our first day could look like. We have what we can almost guarantee is a dry camp. I haven't seen any notable green vegetation looking up that wash, even at the head of the canyon where it gets narrow, where we try and determine or at least expect water to exist if it does exist at all. And it's not a very big watershed, meaning if it does rain, there's not a large area of land that's going to drain into that canyon in the first place, which is also a good way to determine whether there's water present. Have no fear, we can always do a dry camp. And what that's going to entail is having ways to bring water in. It's a fairly flat 2.9 miles from camp. We are going to have a full complement of food, so our packs are never going to be heavier as what they are at the trailhead, especially if we have something like dromedaries to carry water in. So it's going to be a heavy load, but again, a little less than 3 miles is pretty manageable. So determining how much water each person is going to need. Day one, leaving the car, it'd be nice to have at least 2 liters of water full, ready to drink. In camp, having 4 liters of water per person, 1 for dinner, 1 just because, and then 2 liters per person for day 2, because we don't know when we're going to hit water next. So it's prudent to leave camp with 2 full liters per person. And we'll get to day 2 in a second. So carrying water in, In dromedaries, depending on how many people we have, will determine how much water we carry in. And then let's plan on a couple hours of walking, let's say. So if we're going to be walking roughly 2 miles per hour in a group over relatively flat terrain, we're looking at about 1.5 hours. Let's call it 2 hours because we will have heavy packs. We should stop if people get hot spots. Let's say 2 hours of travel to camp. Depending on what time we get to the trailhead, that should give us plenty of time and daylight to scout these escapes. We saw a trail possibly going up from camp to here. That would be a really easy one just to boogie up, make a call, send some people up canyon here. And a little bit about scouting before people just drop packs and start running in all sorts of directions towards where they determine they want to scout. We want to do it more or less in a controlled fashion. Couple people at least head one direction, a known direction. Another couple people head up a separate direction, and we want to have a turnaround time so we don't have an undetermined amount of time that people are going to be scouting because they might just get wrapped up in the process and make it back to camp hours later. We're going to build in some scouting time, and that'll be good information for day 2. For day 2, let's go back to our overview. So initially, we're going to exit this canyon and hopefully hit one of these roads. Let's determine whether those are actual roads. We can escape off of that mesa and down into the head of Cane Wash right here. Or what looks pretty cool, especially linking up navigational features or terrain features, cut through that pass, maybe hit one of these trails, drop into this small side canyon off of Cane Wash, and end up in Cane Wash itself. So a couple options there. Let's figure out which one we might actually try. So we talked about escaping out here. We're going to assume that we have a couple options on day 2, the morning of. And we talked about jumping through this pass here. So let's take a closer look at that. Using our satellite imagery, it looks just like scree slopes or so. There might be some cliff bands here. Let's go back to Google Earth. It looks pretty mellow. Could be loose. I don't know that we want to plan on jumping down those, but we have a possible way down here. Try and do something like that. I think we could make it down here. Yep, there's a trail marked here. Looks maybe like an old mining road. And our next crux will be getting down into that drainage. So again, using our contours and a bit of our satellite imagery, this could be a possible escape. And a couple other breaks in the cliff. And around here is a possibility too, at the head of that drainage. So again, back to Google Earth. That's our pass right there. And here is our image of our possible entrance into that side canyon. Yeah, looks like right about here and potentially right about here. So we've determined that most likely we can access that canyon via that slope. It might just require a little bit of pack passing. We might be able to get in this way as well up at the head of that small canyon. While we're on Google Earth, let's try and determine if we have any water sources as soon as we enter Cane Wash. And it looks like that is a pretty good spot right there, potentially upstream as well. Back to Cal Topo, that is the confluence of our side canyon to Cane Wash. And let's zoom out a little bit. We identified an area at that confluence where we might be able to find water. Following Cane Wash downstream, our guaranteed water is going to be where we hit the San Rafael River. As we know from our Module 1, springtime in the desert may be guaranteed that there could be some potholes in upper Cane Wash. Otherwise, we're committing ourselves to getting to the San Rafael River. And this area here, some of you might recall from our Flow Genome Canyons trip, these flats here, slightly raised above the San Rafael, is a pretty good camping area. So let's go ahead and mark that and measure our mileage. Let's determine our mileage for day 2. Again, I'm going to right click. To the confluence of Cane Wash, where we identified potentially a spring, standing water, a little bit more green vegetation at 2.83 miles. So figuring out how fast a group is going to travel, especially with some route finding, maybe right out of our first camp and then up and over that pass. Let's say if we are hiking at 2 miles an hour on a good trail, 2.8 miles could take us 3 hours if we're only moving at a mile an hour. Let's say 3 hours. We do want to stop and do some navigation because passing through this notch right here is actually kind of a cool navigational exercise. So stopping to take some time with that. We don't need to rush that group out of there. But if we determine that everyone's leaving camp with 2 liters of water each, we'll be getting at least 1 liter down in that time. So factor that in. So possible water at 2.84 miles. So let's determine our total miles so we can kind of figure out how to best move through that canyon if we don't find water. Double click on that to save that line. 6.74 miles. So that's actually perfect for a full day in the backcountry. We can look a little closer on Google Earth at this canyon to determine what kind of terrain we'll be hiking through. You can see here more greenery. It looks fairly wet in the canyon. That's good information. Pretty wide open though, if we just do a quick flyover. Again, more potential water sources in that canyon. Pretty wide open, sandy bottom. So that's also good for us. As far as travel goes, rocky bottoms sometimes hold more water or potholes, but that takes us right into Cane Wash Camp, which I had marked from a previous trip. So we're looking pretty good. We can probably get through that 6.74 miles in good time with a little bit of route finding at the beginning. And if all else fails and we can't get into this side canyon, we do have a trail. It'll take us a little bit out of our way. We could either walk around or backtrack on known terrain to access Cane Wash. And again, if we're prudent, clocking the miles for that Plan B entrance into Cane Wash if this side canyon doesn't go. All right, and that puts us into Camp 2. As far as getting out of Camp 2 on day 3, it says here that the trail ends right about there. It's helpful to take a look at other resources to see if that trail actually continues. If we go to On X again, the mouth of Cane Wash where it hits the San Rafael, again, that trail continues all the way around and actually up Cane Wash too. It's helpful as far as exercise purposes to try and navigate and create a route when there's no marked trails, but why reinvent the wheel? We know that we have a decent trail. Back to our trailhead. And let's head back to our route and just mark our mileage for day 3. There's our line for day 3, 3.45 miles, heading slightly downhill, downstream, 2 miles an hour on an established trail. Let's call that an hour and a half, hour and 45. Then it's just a matter of figuring out when your participants have to get out of there, if there's flights to catch, and how much unpacking there will be, reorganizing gear, de-issuing gear, and getting on the road.